So if you've ever been to a small school, you'll know that a lot of the elective classes don't really tend to have an audience. Like, out of 100 people, how many do you think have a passion for graphic design? Because at my school, that number was 0, and you could tell this by the fact that none of the 16 or so people who were in the class on the first day looked like they intended to be there, or had any idea what a Photoshop was, for that matter. And I was actually included in that list of people who had no intention of joining a yearbook class. I didn't sign up for it, it's just one of those classes that needed to be filled and was basically just a glorified daycare for jaded and questionably horny teenagers. The first day went about as you would expect. We filled out these sheets of paper that basically functioned as a questionnaire to introduce us to the teacher, who also looked like she didn't want to be there. For the sake of the story, I'll call her Miss Fox. She was a nice-looking middle-aged lady who you could tell she was trying her best to be optimistic, because I don't think she had any idea how she ended up being the yearbook teacher. The second day was a bit of a surprise, because the class size was just a bit smaller than it was the day before, by which I mean 6 people immediately went to the counselor to have it dropped. But we were still optimistic. Our first task was to designate official roles for each of the remaining members of the class, like official yearbook manager, leader, supervisor person. I don't remember what they were actually called or did, but that's okay, because I don't think anyone else did either, or cared, really. Our second task was a little bit simpler. We basically just had to pick a main font we wanted to use for the yearbook. Let's play a little guessing game. How long do you think this task took us? Now, remember your answer in your head. 3 weeks. Did you guess right? If you did, you certainly did a better job of guessing than I did, because I fully expected this task to be done and over with in 20 minutes, like it probably should have been. See, the people in the class had a bit of an issue. They didn't agree. Not necessarily on the font, that one more so came down to the fact that no one really cared enough to get it done, but on more trivial things, like with each other as people. They hated each other, like a lot. Yeah, there were a few rivalries in the class. Let's introduce some of the characters. The first of them is a girl we'll call Janice. Janice was a freshman, and I'm gonna pause here to say that I don't really like bashing people or putting them down, especially in my videos, but you could tell with Janice that something was missing. Self-awareness. She completely lacked self-awareness, to the point where at multiple times during the school year I would physically have to put my face down on the table and cover my ears to try and shield myself from the secondhand embarrassment I would experience by listening to this absolute being of chaos. And what made it worse was that I actually became friends with Janice on the first day of school, because I didn't know what kind of person she was, and we shared a few similar interests. Unsurprisingly, Janice was the centerpiece of a lot of the drama that happened within the class, a lot of which was with someone who seemed to be Janice's best friend at the time, but that went downhill pretty quick. And with a person I'll call Alex, a junior girl like me at the time, who's the one and only person in the school, at least that I'm aware of, who unironically said she hated me. That was in freshman year though. By senior year, we were pretty cool with each other, I think. Anyway, the first major project of the class was to design the front and back covers for the book, and remember how I said none of the people in the class were passionate about graphic design? Yeah, it kinda showed. All 10 people in the class designed a cover of their own, and then we were supposed to vote on which one we thought was best. Unsurprisingly though, pretty much everyone voted for their own, and similar to the last project, it quickly became a few weeks later before the teacher decided we had to resolve this. So how did she resolve this predicament, you might ask? Well, she basically took cover options 1 and 2 and had us vote on just those 2. Which, You see, the owner of those 2 covers were Janice and Alex's boyfriend, who also happened to be in the class. Now, right off the bat, you could tell that Alex's boyfriend had made an objectively better cover. Janice's wasn't horrible, but it also wasn't really legible. But that sure didn't stop her from getting her 3 friends in the class to vote for hers, who were, at the time, the girl mentioned earlier, I don't actually remember her name, and this pair of brothers who were really cool people. I'd even say they were what made the class bearable for the rest of the year. I had inside jokes with them, and a ton of surprisingly interesting conversations. Anyway, chaos erupted. See, Janice ended up winning the vote, but naturally people weren't all that happy about it, especially Alex and her boyfriend. And of course, Alex and Janice began to argue, and when I say it was bad, yikes. See, the crux of Janice's argument was that, her words not mine, she was smarter than Alex. like mentioning her IQ and everything, basically being the walking embodiment of that one subreddit. Anyway, things got heated, there was some tension in the class for the next few months, yada yada yada, and eventually Janice decided that she would drop the class, but not before guaranteeing that the teacher had submit her cover to the yearbook website for approval, which was petty, but I honestly kinda respect it. By now we were about 40% of the way through the school year when the other big thing of note happened. Miss Fox, our teacher, decided to retire, from our school at least. She actually came to me to talk about it after class one day, and she actually seemed kinda sad to go. Apparently she had a disagreement with the then principal of the school and was moving to a teaching position in one of the neighboring schools. It was pretty sad, honestly. She gave me a hug and that was basically the end of it. The new teacher was someone who you could tell was a lot more I don't want to use the word competent, but she was a lot more competent. That's not to diss Ms. Fox or anything, she was a great person, but I don't think she was really cut out for the yearbook position, though in all fairness it was basically forced upon her. The first day with the new teacher, you could kinda tell she was in disbelief. I think she was just surprised that 40% of the way through the school year we had literally nothing to show for it. Oh, but what about that cover? You might ask. Yeah, it got rejected. Apparently the dimensions were wrong or something. Anyway, with Janice gone, there was basically no one who was too opposed to just using the cover that Alex's boyfriend had made. Unsurprisingly, it didn't get rejected this time, and we were immediately tasked with a set number of pages that we would each have to make. There was one problem though. We didn't have the pictures we were supposed to have. You see, there are a lot of school events that are each designated their own page in the yearbook, like the haunted house or the Thanksgiving lunch and all that jazz. The problem was, we were the ones who were supposed to take the pictures for them. Once again, things kinda went into panic mode as we tried to figure out ways to make up for it. Still, you could kinda tell a lot of the class weren't really all that invested in the project, but it was actually kinda funny to watch them actually facing consequences for not doing their work, because the new teacher just straight up wasn't having any of it. Like, she knew what they were supposed to be doing, and she also knew that they spent the entire period playing Raft Wars instead. Albeit, I wasn't much better. I basically spent 90% of each class period browsing random Ask Reddit threads, but I actually got my work done, so she never called me out on it. By now it was nearing the end of the period we were allotted to create the yearbook. We had about 3 weeks before we had to submit it, and we were only maybe a bit over halfway done. So, the teacher decided, you know what, we have to get this done. It'll look really bad if we don't, so I'm just gonna take the 2 kids who actually know what they're doing, let them do the bulk of the grunt work, and do everything else myself. I was one of those 2 kids, by the way, and I was assigned to create literally every advertisement in the back of the book, which wasn't too bad because I didn't actually have to create too many things, but it involved calling all of the companies who sponsored in previous years, asking them if they wanted to sponsor us again, and having them send in their advertisement and information. And as a very socially awkward person, I wasn't exactly excited to be a discount door-to-door salesman. Thankfully, one of the 2 brothers I mentioned earlier was a lot more socially confident and helped me out by making some of the calls. 3 weeks of chaos later, and we had finally managed to get everything done. Or so we thought. You remember how I said none of us really had any passion for graphic design? Yeah, a lot of the pages we made had looked kinda not great. Like, I thought I did a pretty good job on some of the pages I made, but looking at some of the things other people had made, like, some of these pages commit so many graphic design sins that they were almost painful to look at. Like, you'd have a bright red background with orange text that wasn't capitalized, picture of a heart that you could tell was copied and pasted from the first Google search result, scaled up far larger than it probably should have been, and then the rest of the images on the page would be like different sizes and have outlines that weren't even the same width. I think you get the point by now. Thankfully our teacher came in clutch and was like, alright, I got an extension for spring break, I'll work on fixing things up and making things look good, don't worry about the rest. I think we were all pretty happy to just say we were done with it, and that was that. Yearbook class was over. Unsurprisingly, the next year included basically none of the same students from the year before, despite our ability to take it again. I wonder why. But nonetheless, I can't say I regret the experience. It was a nice distraction from the absolute chaos going on in my life at the time that you know a little something about if you watch my previous video. And speaking of my previous video, thanks for all of the kind words. I really appreciate how kind and supportive you guys are. If you're curious about how the yearbook turned out, I think it was okay. I didn't actually buy a copy, but the few minutes I got to spend looking through it, the one thing I noticed that stuck out to me as being too messed up was that my name was spelled wrong. Thanks for watching and sticking around, and I hope to see you again in the future. Okay, bye.